The city walls were high, the gates were sealed, the defenders were confident. They believed distance would save them. They believed numbers would protect them. They believed the world beyond their horizon was still civilized. They were wrong. By the time the dust settled, not a single stone stood where a metropolis once breathed. The rivers ran dark with ash. Entire languages vanished. And somewhere on the open steppe, a man who had once been hunted like an animal calmly planned the next annihilation. This is not just the story of conquest. This is the story of how an empire was erased so completely that history itself struggled to remember it. And once you step into this story, you won't want to leave. The Mongolian steppe does not forgive. It stretches endlessly, a sea of grass whipped by brutal winds, where winters can shatter bone and summers scorch the earth into dust. There are no cities here, no walls, no refuge, only movement or death. This land shaped people the way pressure shapes diamonds. Temujin was born into this world around 1162. Not as a prince, but as prey. His father was poisoned when Temujin was still a child, betrayed during what should have been a peaceful visit to another clan. Overnight, his family lost protection, status, and allies. In steppe society, weakness was contagious. Once Temujin's father died, his clan abandoned them without hesitation. His mother, Huelun, was left to raise her children alone, scavenging for roots, hunting small animals, teaching them to survive on almost nothing. This was not a tragic backstory. It was a lesson. Temujin learned early that loyalty was fragile, that promises dissolved under hunger, and that the world rewarded strength above all else. When his half-brother grew dominant and threatening, Temujin did not hesitate. He killed him, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. The steppe taught him something cities never could. Power must be taken before it is lost. As Temujin grew, so did his reputation. He was captured by rival clans, enslaved, shackled with a wooden collar meant to humiliate and break him. But even then, he observed, he waited, he escaped. And with each escape, something hardened inside him. He began to understand that the old tribal system, built on bloodlines and inherited privilege, was flawed. It created weak leaders protected by tradition. Temujin would build something different, not a tribe, a machine. And once that idea took root, nothing on the steppe could stop it. But the steppe was only the beginning. Beyond the horizon lay cities filled with gold, scholars who believed themselves superior, and empires convinced that nomads were little more than pests. They had no idea a storm was forming, and it was already moving toward them. Genghis Khan understood something most rulers never did. Fear travels faster than armies. As his power grew across the steppe, he did not rush outward blindly. He paused. He watched. He listened. He gathered information the way others gathered gold. Merchants were questioned. Envoys were tested. Captives were interrogated, not just for military details, but for psychology. How did their enemies think? What terrified them? What made them hesitate? The Mongols learned their enemies before they ever met them. This was not accidental. Genghis Khan institutionalized intelligence as a weapon. Scouts moved days ahead of the main force, sometimes weeks. They mapped rivers, mountain passes, supply routes, and escape paths. They learned which cities were divided internally, which rulers were paranoid, which generals were arrogant. When the Mongols finally appeared, it often felt less like an invasion and more like destiny arriving on schedule. Their tactics reflected this precision. The famous feigned retreat was not a chaotic withdrawal. It was theatre. Mongol cavalry would strike, pull back, pretend to panic, and lure enemy forces into open ground. Once the pursuit stretched thin, the Mongols would turn, encircle, and erase them. To those who survived, it felt supernatural, an army that could vanish and reappear at will, a force that seemed to know every move before it was made. But the true terror lay in Mongol discipline. Disobedience was death. Looting without orders was death. Abandoning a comrade was death. Entire units were punished for the failure of one man. This collective responsibility forged a unity most settled armies could not imagine. Genghis Khan did not want heroes, he wanted obedience. Yet he was not blind to talent. Engineers, scribes, doctors, and craftsmen were spared during conquests, absorbed into the Mongol system regardless of origin. A man who could build siege engines or calculate supplies was more valuable alive than any noble killed in defiance. This pragmatism baffled enemies. The Mongols were ruthless, yes, but never random. They killed with purpose. And when mercy was offered, it was absolute. Cities that surrendered early were spared destruction. Their people lived. Their trade continued. Their rulers often retained power under Mongol oversight. But those who resistance was answered with annihilation, not out of rage, but strategy. Genghis Khan understood that destroying one city could save 10 battles later. Refugees carried stories faster than messengers. The fear of Mongol wrath emptied cities before the Mongols even arrived. Psychological warfare became as important as arrows. By the time the Mongols looked beyond the steppe, they were not simply an army seeking conquest. They were a system designed to collapse civilizations. And beyond the grasslands lay a world utterly unprepared for what that system would unleash. Caravan routes stretched westward, linking China to Persia, Persia to the Islamic heartlands, the Islamic world to Europe. Along these routes rose cities swollen with wealth, culture, and confidence. Among them stood one empire in particular, vast, powerful, and fatally arrogant. Its ruler believed himself the equal of any king on earth. He was about to make the worst mistake of his life, and when he did, Genghis Khan would respond, not with diplomacy, but with extinction. Before the Mongols came, the Khwarazmian Empire believed itself untouchable. It stretched across the heart of Central Asia like a jeweled belt. Persia, Transoxiana, Khwarazm, cities bound together by trade, scholarship, and the slow confidence of prosperity. Its lands were threaded with caravan routes where silk, spices, gold, and ideas flowed freely. Minarets pierced the sky. Libraries held centuries of knowledge. Markets buzzed with languages from a dozen worlds. This was not a fragile civilization. This was an empire that had survived rivals, rebellions, and time itself. At its center ruled Shah Muhammad Sit. He was ambitious, suspicious, and obsessed with authority. His court glittered with wealth, but beneath the surface ran deep fractures. Governors competed for favor. Generals mistrusted one another. Power was centralized around the Shah's paranoia rather than distributed through loyalty. Still, none of this seemed dangerous, because the Shah believed geography itself protected him. To the east lay deserts and steppe, nomads, he assumed, disorganized, inferior, useful as mercenaries at best, pests at worst. The Mongols were a rumor, a distant thunder. Then one day, that thunder knocked on his door politely. Genghis Khan did not begin with war. He began with trade. A caravan of Mongol merchants arrived at the frontier city of Otrar, carrying silver, furs, and goods meant for peaceful exchange. Along with them came a message. Genghis Khan wished to establish formal trade relations. He recognized the Shah as an equal. He wanted cooperation, not conflict. It was a gift wrapped in opportunity. But opportunity requires wisdom. The governor of Otrar, Inalchok, saw something else. Suspicion, perhaps greed, perhaps ambition. He accused the merchants of espionage, seized their goods, and had them executed. This was no border skirmish. This was an insult written in blood. When Genghis Khan heard, he did not explode. He did not rage. He did what terrified enemies most. He waited. Then he sent envoys. 3 men rode west carrying no weapons, only words. Their message was measured, restrained. Punish the governor. Return the stolen goods. Let peace continue. The Shah faced a choice. Had he agreed, history would be unrecognizable. Instead, he chose arrogance. 1 envoy was beheaded. The others were humiliated, their beards shaved, a grave insult in steppe culture, and sent back alive. This was not diplomacy. This was declaration. When the envoys returned, Genghis Khan listened in silence. Those who knew him expected fury. Instead, he turned his eyes to the sky, stepped away from his men, and stood alone. According to Mongol tradition, he prayed, not for mercy, for permission. The war that followed was not spontaneous. It was systematic, calculated, relentless. Genghis Khan did not simply march west. He dismantled the idea of safety itself. The Khwarazmian Empire expected invasion from a single direction. What came instead was a nightmare geometry. Mongol forces split into multiple columns, crossing deserts thought impassable, appearing where defenses did not exist. Cities that believed themselves deep in the rear suddenly found Mongol banners on the horizon. Otrar fell first. The siege was brutal. When the city finally collapsed, Inalchok was captured. His punishment became legend. Molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a symbolic execution for a man who had valued wealth over wisdom. The message was clear. No betrayal would be forgotten. Then the Mongols moved again. Bukhara, a city of scholars and mosques, convinced its walls would protect it. The Mongols breached them in days. Genghis Khan reportedly rode into the city and addressed the people inside a mosque, not as a conqueror, but as an instrument of judgment. I am the punishment of God, he is said to have declared. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Whether the words are exact or not, the effect was real. Bukhara burned. Samarkand followed, a jewel of the Islamic world, fortified, populous, confident. Its garrison numbered in the tens of thousands. It fell anyway. Defenders were executed. Artisans were spared and sent east. The city's soul was stripped and redistributed across an empire that did not care where knowledge came from, only that it served conquest. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad did not fight. He fled. From city to city, island to island, the ruler of one of the greatest empires on earth ran as his kingdom collapsed behind him. His generals were isolated. His armies defeated piecemeal. His authority evaporated. The Mongols pursued him not with haste, but with certainty, because this was never just about territory. This was about erasure. And the Shah would live long enough to watch his world disappear, one city at a time. But even as the Khwarazmian Empire collapsed, The Mongols were learning something new. They were learning just how fragile civilization could be. And they would take that lesson with them, far beyond Central Asia, because the destruction had only begun. The fall of the Khwarazmian Empire was not a single catastrophe. It was a rolling apocalypse. As Mongol armies fanned outward, they did not move like conquerors planting flags. They moved like hunters driving prey into exhaustion. Cities fell not because they were weak, but because the rules they relied on no longer applied. Walls meant nothing. Distance meant nothing. Numbers meant nothing. What followed was not random slaughter, but a deliberate rewriting of warfare, one that spread terror faster than any army ever could. At Urgench, one of the richest cities in the Islamic world, the Mongols faced fierce resistance. The city sat amid rivers and canals, its streets narrow, its defenses complex. This was not open steppe, where cavalry could dominate. So the Mongols adapted. They diverted rivers. They collapsed walls. They flooded neighborhoods, and when the city finally fell, what happened next shocked even seasoned chroniclers. According to contemporary accounts, the population was divided among Mongol soldiers for execution. Each warrior was assigned a quota: men, women, children, no distinction. The numbers recorded by historians are almost certainly exaggerated, but the truth beneath them remains chilling. Urgench was depopulated so thoroughly that it ceased to function as a city. It was not revenge, it was demonstration. Every survivor who escaped carried the same story. Resistance meant obliteration. From there, Mongol columns surged south into Persia. Nishapur fell after its governor killed a Mongol general. The response was annihilation. The city was leveled. Even animals were reportedly slaughtered. Human skulls were stacked into towers. These were not acts of blind rage. They were psychological engineering. Fear became a weapon sharper than steel. Ahead of the Mongol advance, cities surrendered without a fight. Gates opened. Rulers knelt. Tribute flowed. The Mongols often spared them. Behind the advance, the world burned. This duality confused contemporaries. How could the same army show mercy in one place and utter destruction in another? The answer was control. Genghis Khan was not interested in chaos. He was interested in obedience. Resistance threatened the system. It suggested that defiance was possible. That illusion had to be destroyed publicly, graphically, and permanently. And so the stories grew. Some were true, some were embellished, all were useful. Mothers told their children that if they misbehaved, the Mongols would come. Merchants rerouted caravans. Kings fortified borders that meant nothing. By the time the Mongols reached the edges of the known world, they no longer needed to fight every battle. Their reputation arrived first. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad died alone on an island in the Caspian Sea, sick, paranoid, stripped of everything he had ruled. His empire vanished with him, carved into memory as a warning rather than a legacy. His son, Jalal ad-Din, fought on bravely, even impressively, but he fought fragments of a storm, not its heart. The Mongols moved past him. They had larger ambitions now, because with Persia shattered, the gates to new worlds lay open. To the north waited the forests and rivers of the Rus principalities. To the west, the plains of Eastern Europe. To the south, the ancient Islamic heartlands. The Mongols had learned how to break civilizations. Now they would test that knowledge on the world itself, and as they rode forward, one truth became unavoidable. History was no longer being written by kings in palaces. It was being rewritten by riders in the dust. and the worst was still to come. Europe did not hear the Mongols coming. It felt them, like a pressure change before a storm. In the early 13th century, the lands of the Rus were fractured, proud, and deeply unprepared. Principalities squabbled over titles, while old alliances rotted. Fortified towns dotted the forests and riverbanks, each confident in its walls, each convinced that danger would arrive slowly, formally, with banners and declarations. Instead, it arrived like a rumor that killed. The first Mongol scouts crossed into the western steppe not as invaders, but as observers. They watched Slavic patrols. They listened to merchants. They learned the habits of armies that still marched in rigid blocks and believed honor outweighed adaptability. When the Rus finally noticed something was wrong, it was already too late. At the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, a coalition of Rus princes and Cuman allies confronted a Mongol force they believed inferior. The Mongols retreated, again and again, drawing the allied army deeper into unfamiliar terrain. Then they turned. The battle was not close. The Rus lines collapsed. Princes were captured, bound beneath wooden platforms, and executed slowly, while Mongol leaders feasted above them. An act meant not just to kill, but to humiliate the very idea of aristocratic power. The Mongols withdrew afterward, not because they were defeated, but because the invasion was not yet ready. Europe misread this pause as salvation. Years later, the storm returned. This time, it did not stop. Under Subutai and Batu Khan, Mongol armies surged into Eastern Europe with terrifying coordination. Poland, Hungary, Transylvania. The Mongols struck multiple fronts simultaneously, confusing defenders and overwhelming response systems designed for slower wars. Knights charged in gleaming armor, expecting decisive clashes. They were shredded by arrows before they ever reached their enemy. At the Battle of Legnica, European forces gathered under banners of faith and feudal obligation. They never understood what hit them. Smoke bombs, feigned retreats, encirclements. The Mongols dismantled armies that had dominated European battlefields for centuries. In Hungary, King Bela IV watched his kingdom collapse in months. Towns burned. Refugees flooded west. Priests wrote letters describing an enemy that did not negotiate, did not tire, and did not fight by any known rules. Panic spread. Some believed the Mongols were demons. Others thought they were the lost tribes of Israel. Few understood that they were witnessing the future of warfare. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the invasion stopped. In 1241, news arrived from the east. Ögedei Khan, son of Genghis Khan and ruler of the Mongol Empire, was dead. By tradition, Mongol princes had to return home to elect a new great Khan. Europe was spared by a death thousands of miles away. It never knew how close it came to annihilation. Church bells rang. Chronicles declared divine intervention. Cities rebuilt, believing the danger had passed, but the truth was far more unsettling. The Mongols had not been defeated. They had simply been distracted. And in the east, the empire continued to grow, adapting, evolving, refining its machinery of domination. Because conquest was no longer just about destruction, it was about administration, trade, control. The Mongols were learning how to rule the ruins they created, and that transformation from apocalypse to empire would change the world in ways few could have imagined. The world expected the Mongols to burn themselves out. Empires built on destruction usually do. But the Mongols did something unprecedented. They learned how to govern the void they created. After the initial waves of conquest, the Mongol Empire did not dissolve into chaos. It crystallized. Roads were secured. Borders were defined. Systems replaced improvisation. What had once been a storm became infrastructure. At the heart of this transformation was a simple realization. Terror opened doors, but stability kept them open. The Mongols established the Pax Mongolica, a vast zone of relative safety stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the edges of Eastern Europe. Banditry was punished mercilessly. Trade routes were protected. Messengers could ride thousands of miles using the Yam system, a relay network of fresh horses and supplies that allowed information to move faster than ever before. For the first time in history, the Eurasian world was stitched together. Merchants traveled with confidence. Scholars crossed borders freely. Ideas moved as quickly as goods. Paper currency, gunpowder, medical knowledge, astronomy, concepts leapt continents under Mongol protection. Ironically, the same empire that had erased cities now enabled unprecedented connection. This was not accidental benevolence. The Mongols understood profit. They taxed trade rather than strangling it. They encouraged artisans, translators, and engineers. They ruled through tolerance, allowing multiple religions to coexist so long as loyalty flowed upward. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, all found space beneath Mongol rule. But peace did not mean softness. Rebellion was still answered with extinction. What changed was efficiency. Local administrators were often left in place, monitored closely. Census systems tracked populations. Laws were standardized. Even the death penalty became regulated rather than arbitrary. This balance between terror and order was the secret to Mongol longevity. Yet the empire carried a fatal tension. It was built by conquest, but sustained by compromise. Genghis Khan himself never saw this fully formed system. He died in 1227, his burial place hidden, his body erased from history as thoroughly as the cities he destroyed. His sons and grandsons inherited not just land, but a question. How long can a world forged in violence hold together? As generations passed, the empire fractured into khanates. The Yuan in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in the West. Each adapted to local culture. Each drifted further from the steppe, origins that had once unified them. And as they settled, something changed. The Mongols stopped moving. They built capitals. They adopted customs. They lost the edge that had made them unstoppable. The very success of the empire planted the seeds of its decline. Because while the Mongols connected the world, they also connected something far darker. Along the same trade routes that carried silk and silver traveled disease. Invisible, unstoppable, and it would finish what armies could not. The Mongols did not intend to change biology, but by connecting the world, they did. Under the Pax Mongolica, caravans moved freely across thousands of miles. Fleas traveled with them. Rats followed grain. Pathogens crossed borders that had once slowed them for centuries. Somewhere in the steppes of Central Asia, a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, found the perfect highway. It rode Mongol trade routes west. By the 1340s, whispers of a strange sickness crept along the Silk Road. Entire villages vanished. Bodies blackened. Fevers burned through households in days. Merchants arrived at cities already dying. Then came Kaffa. A Genoese trading port on the Black Sea, Kaffa was besieged by Mongol forces of the Golden Horde. As disease ravaged the besiegers, desperation turned grotesque. According to contemporary accounts, Plague-ridden corpses were hurled over the city walls. Whether literal or symbolic, the result was the same. The plague entered Europe. From there, it spread with horrifying speed. Italy, France, England, the Holy Roman Empire. Cities collapsed, farms emptied, churches rang bells endlessly for the dead until there was no one left to ring them. Up to half of Europe's population died. This was not a Mongol invasion. It was worse. The Black Death shattered feudal systems, collapsed economies, and permanently altered the relationship between labor and power. Scarcity gave peasants leverage. Faith fractured. Science began, slowly, painfully, to replace superstition. The Mongols did not cause the plague deliberately, but they made it possible. They had erased borders. They had accelerated movement. They had turned the world into a single organism, and the organism was now sick. Meanwhile, the Mongol Khanates weakened. Internal conflict grew. Successors fought one another. The unity that had once terrified the world dissolved into regional power struggles. The Yuan dynasty fell in China. The Ilkhanate collapsed in Persia. The Golden Horde fragmented. The storm that had erased empires faded. But its scars remained. Entire regions never recovered demographically. Ancient cities remained ruins. Languages, customs, and knowledge vanished forever, lost not to time, but to speed. And yet, from the wreckage, a new world emerged. Trade networks rebounded stronger. Europe accelerated toward the Renaissance. Gunpowder warfare reshaped states. Globalization, born in blood, became inevitable. The Mongols were gone. But their impact was everywhere. They had not just erased an empire, they had reshaped human history itself. And that leaves us with a final question, one historians still argue over in hushed tones. Was Genghis Khan a destroyer or the architect of the modern world? Genghis Khan died believing his work was unfinished. There was no grand tomb, no monument carved into stone, no city bearing his name. His body was carried into the Mongolian steppe and hidden so completely that even now, centuries later, no one can say with certainty where he lies. According to legend, the soldiers who escorted his body killed anyone who crossed their path, then killed themselves to preserve the secret. Whether true or not, the symbolism is perfect. Genghis Khan did not want remembrance. He wanted permanence, and in that he succeeded. Long after his empire fractured, his shadow continued to shape the world. Borders drawn during Mongol rule hardened into modern nations. Trade routes they secured became arteries of global commerce. Administrative practices they normalized influenced future empires, from the Ottomans to the Russians. Even war itself changed. The Mongols proved that speed could defeat strength, intelligence could defeat size, and fear, properly engineered, could collapse entire civilizations before the first arrow was fired. Every modern doctrine of maneuver warfare traces a line back to the steppe. Yet the most unsettling legacy is biological. Genetic studies suggest that millions of people alive today carry DNA traced back to Genghis Khan or his immediate lineage. Not metaphorically, literally. His genes spread as efficiently as his armies, an empire erased yet replicated inside the human body. But legacy is never simple. To some cultures, Genghis Khan is a hero, unifier, lawgiver, founder. In Mongolia, he is revered as the father of a nation. In others, he is remembered as a butcher, responsible for tens of millions of deaths. Both views are incomplete. He was not uniquely cruel for his time, but he was uniquely effective. The world he destroyed was not innocent. It was hierarchical, exploitative, stagnant. The world that emerged afterward was more fluid, more connected, and infinitely more dangerous. Progress came wrapped in catastrophe, and that raises an uncomfortable truth. History does not reward morality. It rewards its adaptation. Genghis Khan adapted faster than anyone else alive. He saw civilization not as sacred, but as conditional, something that existed only so long as it could defend itself. When it could not, it vanished, and that lesson did not die with him. Every empire since has grappled with the same reality. Power is temporary. Arrogance is fatal. And the margins, the forgotten places, the underestimated people, are often where the future is born. The Mongols came from nowhere. They erased an empire. And in doing so, they built the foundations of the world we live in now. Which leaves us with one final reckoning, not with Genghis Khan, but with ourselves. Because the systems he exposed, the fragility of order, the speed of collapse, the cost of complacency, are not relics of the past. They are warnings, and history has a habit of repeating its most brutal lessons when we stop paying attention. When the Mongols finally faded from the world's center stage, what remained was not peace. It was silence. Across Central Asia, Persia, and parts of Eastern Europe, entire regions felt hollowed out. Roads once crowded with caravans stretched empty. Cities that had taken centuries to build were reduced to names in chronicles, if they were remembered at all. Some places never recovered their population. Others were resettled by different peoples, speaking different languages, practicing different customs, unaware of what had stood there before. History does not mourn out loud. It erases quietly. In many of the lands the Mongols shattered, memory itself became fragmented. Libraries burned, scholars died, oral traditions ended when entire communities vanished. What survived often did so because the Mongols found it useful, knowledge that could serve administration, warfare, or trade. What could not adapt was discarded. This created a strange illusion for later generations. It appeared as though the Mongols had simply passed through a half-empty world, rather than one dense with life and meaning. Absence disguised the scale of loss. In Persia, poetry took on a darker tone. In China, rebellion hardened into ideology. In Europe, fear of the East lingered for centuries, embedded in myths of horsemen from the horizon. Even the word horde entered language as a synonym for chaos, stripped of its original meaning, but heavy with dread. And yet, amid the silence, something else grew. States became more centralized. Kings demanded standing armies. Castles evolved. Gunpowder spread. Diplomacy became more cautious, intelligence more valued. The Mongol shock forced the world to mature brutally fast. No ruler could again assume distance was safety. No wall could be trusted blindly. The Mongols had revealed a terrifying truth. Civilization is not permanent. It is negotiated daily, through logistics, loyalty, adaptation, and restraint. Those that failed this negotiation disappeared. Those that learned survived. Perhaps that is why Genghis Khan still unsettles us. Not because of his violence alone, but because he stripped away comforting illusions. He showed that history favors those who move faster than tradition, who think colder than morality, who understand systems better than symbols. He did not invent cruelty. He optimized it. And optimization, once discovered, never vanishes. Today, satellites replace scouts. Algorithms replace messengers. Economic pressure replaces siege engines. But the logic is unchanged. Speed overwhelms strength. Information defeats mass. Fear reshapes behavior. The Mongol Empire is gone, but the world it forced into existence remains. And that leaves us standing in the same silence that followed the storm, surrounded by systems built from past collapse, hoping we are wiser than those who came before. History suggests otherwise, because every empire believes the storm has passed, until the horizon darkens again. History likes clean endings, the rise, the fall, the lesson neatly packaged and placed on a shelf. But the story of Genghis Khan refuses to end that way. It leaks into everything that came after, refusing to stay buried, much like the man himself. When the Mongol Empire fractured, the world breathed out. Chroniclers spoke of survival, kings spoke of recovery, priests spoke of divine mercy. Everyone agreed on one thing: the nightmare was over. They were wrong, because the true power of the Mongol conquests was not territorial, it was conceptual. Before the Mongols, empires believed hayas equaled safety. That tradition equaled legitimacy, that the world was slow, predictable, bound by seasons and ceremony. The Mongols shattered those assumptions permanently. They proved that a decentralized force could outperform rigid hierarchies. That mobility could defeat fortification. That fear, when systematized, could erase resistance before it formed. These ideas did not die with the Khans. They were absorbed by every power that studied the wreckage carefully. Modern warfare was born in the saddle of a Mongol horse. So was modern globalization. The Mongols showed that the world could function as a single connected system, for better or worse. Goods, ideas, diseases, and technologies moved faster than ever before. No civilization remained isolated again. The age of local history ended. The age of global consequence began. And with that came a darker realization. When the world is connected, collapse travels just as efficiently as prosperity. Genghis Khan never used the word empire the way we do. To him, the world was a field to be organized. Resistance was inefficiency. Borders were temporary. Survival was the only law. This worldview feels uncomfortably familiar. We still live in a world obsessed with efficiency, with speed, with dominance disguised as innovation. We still erase cultures quietly, economically, digitally, environmentally, rather than with fire and steel. The methods changed. The logic did not. That is why Genghis Khan still matters, not as a villain to condemn or a hero to glorify, but as a mirror. He forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Civilization is not defined by its ideals, but by what it tolerates in pursuit of power. And when pressure rises, ideals are often the first casualties. The empires Genghis Khan erased believed themselves superior, stable, chosen. So do many today. They built walls, they trusted systems, they ignored the margins. And then history arrived. Fast, merciless, and unannounced. The Mongols did not end the world. They revealed how easily it can end. And that is the legacy that still lingers. Quiet, unresolved, waiting for the next moment when speed outruns wisdom, when power outruns restraint, when the horizon darkens and no one believes the storm is real. Because history does not repeat itself exactly, it simply waits for us to forget. If this story held you until the end, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what part of history should we uncover next? The storm may be over, but the lesson never ends.